acquisition manager. And we keep him happy over here. So Christopher is going to take a few minutes to give you some of the basics. Do you have a handout?
I do. They should be on all of your sheets.
Okay, so everybody has a handout. So this is something that, again, it's here. We'll go over with you. You can digest and look at the documentation. You can give him a call. Should you have further questions that you need beyond what's going to be happening tonight. So if you can give a warm welcome to Christopher Scott.
Hi, the packet you have towards the back, there's a lot of just kind of vocabulary. That's going to first the trickiest part about leasing is there's always weird phrases that are kind of specific to leasing. So there's all kinds of vocab in the back you can look at later and kind of digest a little bit. Leasing itself is pretty straightforward. It's basically renting. You know, it's like renting an apartment as paying rent as opposed to paying a mortgage. The real advantage, as with renting, is it's cheaper. You know, it's cheaper to rent an apartment than it is to pay a mortgage in a house. It's cheaper to lease a car than it is to buy one. To prove that point, let's look at this beautiful 2013 Corolla S right here. I've got two pictures on it. One shows that you can buy it for $331 a month with no money down. The other shows that you can lease it for $231 a month with no money down. Right? Same car, same equipment. So this is actually the car that I've used for this information here. It's actually this black one sitting right here, and the invoice off it. So for starters, it's got suggested retail price of $20,700 roughly. From that, we've gone down to our Irwin's discount. We're showing the invoice price of $19,427. So for both we're going to start with a purchase, then we're going to look at a lease. It's going to walk down how the same car at the Irwin's discounted price, it works out to be cheaper to lease. So if you were to purchase it, you put no money down. There's still a title documentation fee, just like there is at any dealer. It's $369. So you pay that. Toyota currently has 0.9% APR financing on this car. So that was the interest rate that we used when we calculated the 60-month term. So with zero down at 0.9 for 60 months, the payment works out to $331 per month. Now, if you were, on the other hand, to lease this car, still no money down, but there is the same $369 title and doc fee. There's also a first payment. Much like going back to the apartment analogy, before you move in, you have first month's rent. So it's the same kind of thing here. You pay first month up front. So it ends up being $600 to equivalent signage. It's the $231 plus the $369, $600 due. And it's just $231 a month for 36 months, 12,000 miles per year. So the real advantage of that is it's a cheaper way to do it, especially if you are the sort of person who turns in your car every 3 or 4 years. It's actually cheaper to lease it. So the benefits of leasing are a lower monthly payment, and if you trade in a car, as I mentioned, every 2 to 3 years, it actually works out cheaper. Now some people say, oh, I want to buy the car. I want to own it so I can get equity in the car. I have something to show for it when I go to turn it back in. Well, I actually had Betty run the numbers for me on this car. If you were to purchase it and pay the $331 per month and went to turn it back in after 36 months, the value of that car after 36 months is pretty much the same as the balance you still owe on it. So you'd effectively have, it would be pretty close to a wash. I don't think it was exactly zero, but it's like a couple $100 basically. So you'd basically be paying another $100 a month for 36 months. That's $3,600 extra you'd be paying to have $200 to show for at the end of 3 years. So if you do turn your car in every 3 years and you do drive, less than 15,000 miles a year, say, it would actually save you a substantial amount of money to lease. One thing I want to mention is gap insurance, which effectively it protects you from the difference between what you owe on a car and what the insurance company gives you for a check in the event of a total loss. So say when it was really windy last week, a tree had fallen on your car, if you still owed $12,000 in that car, and Allstate or State Farm, whoever gave you a check for $10,000, you know, and you didn't have gap insurance, you would still have to come up with that $2,000 difference. Gap insurance protects you. It says, okay, well, your insurer gave you $10,000, you still owe $2,000, so we're going to cover the $2,000. And it really is fairly reasonable. It's probably usually, what, $5, $10 a month or something like that?
Yeah, depends on the term.
Depends on the term. But so that's just kind of another way to give you peace of mind with your lease. And then kind of on a related note, peace of mind, one of the main advantages about leasing is that it does have, especially if you do a 3-year term at 12,000 miles a year, then you're always under bumper to bumper warranty. Anyway, yeah, so if you do a 3-year term of 36,000 miles, then you're under bumper to bumper the whole time you have the car. Even if you do a 3-year, 15,000 mile a year lease, so you have 45,000 miles roughly, when you turn it back in, you're still under powertrain warranty. So the main another advantage of leasing is that you don't have to worry about replacing a transmission. You don't have to worry about anything being wrong with the engine and spending thousands of dollars to fix this car. You're also, if you own it for 3 years, turning it back in right around the time you'd be replacing tires. You don't have to worry about replacing the brakes. Just all those kind of maintenance fees that owning a car kind of adds up to. You don't have to worry about that. Which, you know, again, kind of going back to the renting versus the owning a home thing, you know, you don't have, if you're renting an apartment, you don't have to worry about redoing the roof. You don't have to worry about replacing the boiler. You know, that's somebody else's problem. You just pay to use it, not to own it. Yeah. Okay, a lot of questions. All right, geez, I'll start with you first.
If you lease a car and for whatever reason your tires do wear out, you then are responsible for paying.
It's still a wear item, yes. It wouldn't be covered under the bumper to bumper, but that's true for any manufacturer.
Even if you didn't lease it?
Yeah.
You purchased it, and you're an owner and not a leaseor.
Right.
If you're still within 36,000 miles and those tires are worn, you are still responsible.
You want to trade it in with it.
That's right. You want to trade it in.
What about the penalties if you go over the...
Oh, that again depends on the manufacturer. With Toyota, it's 15 cents per mile over.
And is that per year?
No, it's per mile. It's 15 cents.
No, but I mean, if I drive this year 18,000 miles...
It's just at the end of the term. If you have a 3-year, 36,000 mile term, if you turn it back over with 36,001 miles, you owe them 15 cents. And it doesn't really matter. Say you can drive 14,000 miles 1 year and 10,000 miles the next and 12,000 miles the third year. As long as it adds up to 36,000 miles, then it's all good. It's just if that mileage is over when you turn it back in, that's where you incur the penalties.
So if leasing doesn't work, if you're driving a lot.
If you're putting 20,000 miles a year on your car, it probably wouldn't be a good fit for you, no. But if you're doing, 15,000 miles or less, then it might be a thing to consider. Any other questions? Ma'am in the front? Okay. Okay.
Well, the requirement through a lease is they have to pass inspection, and they should match. So you're not going to have like 4 different tires that pass inspection. They expect the tires to match.
And also, like I were just saying that something had happened with your tire and they do.
Yeah, and that can happen. Sometimes an overinflated tire will give you an ordinary wear as well as an underinflated tire. Will wear the edges a lot more quickly. If an overinflated tire, the center's going to wear quickly and the edges are fine. So that's
just the fine print is really important.
It certainly is important. I think this is why we're here this evening as well, is just to be well informed. And it's not that leasing is the be-all and end-all, but for someone who ordinarily does like to change a car 3 years or so, does it really do you really, number one, own it when you're making a payment to the bank? No offense, Grace. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're in a 60-month loan and you're making payments and you're into it for 3 years and now you decide to trade it, now you've got the situation, am I in an equity position? I paid $100 more a month to be in this particular car, and I may be in equity and I may not. The other advantage that I have seen over the years, and Chris has as well, is what if your car's in an accident? Aren't you glad you're not keeping it? What if you had $10,000 worth of damage on your car and you were trading it in? Hello. I mean, that's going to affect your value. But if you're just turning it as a lease, you're turning it in as a lease. You know. So there are some advantages. And there's some advantages when we saw gas well over $4 an hour, $4 a gallon on trucks. The residuals on the trucks, which is what the value is at maturity of the lease, they were getting 50 cents to the dollar on that value. Aren't you glad you weren't trading in that truck when they were getting 50 cents to the dollar? Now, if you're on the other side and the values have increased, you have the potential, even though you haven't put money down, even though you haven't, you're paying less money a month, you have the potential of actually having sometimes a little equity into a lease. And you can then use it as a trade. But if there's no equity situation, it just goes back to the manufacturer. So if you did lease a vehicle with Irwin at that maturity of the lease, it's not Irwin's car, it's Toyota's car. If you elect not to buy it, we have to go through a similar process as you with residual and market value before we could consider buying it. It's just a matter of being informed, and over the years we've had many, many people lease. They've gone through the 3-year lease term, and they come back in and say, I want to buy it this time. Then I start showing them the payment. Well, would you like to pay $331, or would you like to pay $231? Oh, I forgot why I leased it. You kind of have to get a little refreshed about that.
I do want to, one thing I forgot to mention is that part of when you're leasing a car and you're signing all the paperwork, they tell you up front exactly what the value of your car will be at the end of the term. And you get the option but not the obligation to purchase it at that predetermined price at the end of the term. So if you do really, and I think this one was like $12,272, I think is the number I'm remembering. So they say like that car at the end of your 3-year lease, you can purchase your car for $12,272. You don't have to, but you have that option. So if you drive it for 3 years, you're like, I really like this car, I'm going to buy it. You know that you can buy it for that money. And if you want to turn it back in, that's fine too, but it gives you the flexibility.
What is the 231 based on? I mean, what is there a
Formula?
formula?
There is.
Yeah, there is. Well, it's.
He doesn't want to.
Well, he doesn't actually.
There is a website I could forward to you that actually walks through this like 7 or 8 step process of how it arrives at the. You basically look at the sell price. In this instance, it was the invoice price, the $19,427. It gives you the lease end value, which was $12,272. You subtract those two numbers. That's essentially the amount of depreciation over the 3-year term. So they factor in what that depreciation is per month. Then there's a couple other steps involving what's called a lease rate factor, which is essentially what you pay to borrow Toyota's money to use the car. Is that a reasonable explanation?
It's not really considered an interest rate. It really is a lease rate factor. And the formula is the combination of the selling price and the residual. So with those two factors, those two numbers, the factor is then charged against those numbers.
Right. And it
we can convert it to a rate, but again, it's not technically a rate. So it's the selling price, the residual, and the lease rate factors. Those are the 3 important key items in putting together a lease. And the thing is, with a lease, you can shop a lease. We have on the contract will be your capital cost. And on that cap cost is your acquisition fee, your title documentation fee, and your pricing. So it's all disclosed. There's nothing hidden about it. And not everybody realizes that the selling price is an important factor in what your payment is going to be. So, this full disclosure, I mean, way back in the olden days when Grace and I were in banking, I mean, it was not even a predetermined residual. It was a market residual. So who set that? I mean, how do you know? So that doesn't happen anymore. And it's all really fully disclosed. It's on your contract. It's the complete transparency is there for the consumer. It's just a matter about being informed and whether or not that makes. Now, for me personally, right now, I am leasing. When my kids were in college, it was nice to have a car that I didn't have to worry about maintenance. And it was also nice to have a payment that was low, and I didn't have to use the cash for the car. I had to use it for college. You know, so that worked for me at that particular time. And I have used cars, and I've owned used cars. I mean, that's what I do. I'm a used car manager, and that excites me as well. So it really has to work for you. And I would say probably more than half the employees leave.
Oh yeah, at least,
here,
yeah.
at the store. So, and they have all that important information available to them as it would be to you.
Can leases go beyond 36 months?
You know, they can, Kathy. It's a good question, but most of the manufacturers really set the incentives to encourage the consumer to stay on the shorter term, generally 24 to 36 months. Your depreciation is greater at 4 years. So part of that cost for you to lease is if it depreciates more, it's costing you more in your monthly payment. You want to get the best part of the peak of the vehicle's life. And you know, when we had the market turn into the handbasket mess that it had been, a lot of the manufacturers really ratcheted back because it was so volatile to them. It wasn't to the consumer. They were in pretty good shape with being the lease. But because it was so volatile, not knowing if the car value was this way or that way, they pulled back. And what happened with that is many of our used car options went away. Because a lot of our cars that come in were not coming in as trades, and they weren't coming in as lease turn-ins. And the fact is the rental companies had also ratcheted that. So it really dried up. There's quite a big cycle, and it's certainly beneficial for the manufacturer to encourage the 2 to 3 years. It keeps that cycle, nice used cars coming in, and encouraging the leasing of new cars, and just keeps the wheels of motion really moving.
Sure.
When you say bumper to bumper, what exactly does that cover?
Oh.
Oil changes?
Oh, no. What I'm saying is that doesn't cover the oil changes. Although if you do lease through Toyota, they have what's called Toyota Care, which is not bumper to bumper, but for the first 2 years or 25,000 miles of your lease, you do get free oil changes and a free tire rotation. That's an added benefit specific to Toyota. The bumper-to-bumper warranty means that if anything goes wrong in your car through a defect, it's replaced free of charge. Like your radio stops working, not a problem.
But the regular maintenance
you're required to take care of yourself. But if there was some kind of defect with, like the panel trim in your door, if it turned a weird color, started cracking, that would be fixed, free of charge to you. And then the powertrain is essentially the engine of the drivetrain of the car, the major expensive components.
But not wearable parts.
Not wearable parts, so brakes and tires are not included. But the expensive stuff is, if your motor stopped working, for example, that would be, no one wants a motor stuck open. And you don't want to pay for that fixed either, so you don't have to worry about it. No?
Years ago, we used the Lease.
Okay.
But we brought the car in and it was air conditioned. But how do you know if it's a default? Because he tried to blame us on a dirt road and the rock not made a hole in the air conditioning.
Well, generally, if it is, if...
So we end up paying for that.
Well, then that wouldn't be a defective manufacturer. That would be damage from impact. If someone runs into you, if someone runs a red light and crashes into your car, and it breaks the battery, for example, like your insurance would cover that, but Toyota wouldn't pay to replace the battery.
We went on a dirt road and the rock went up.
It's all.
And we never went on a dirt road.
Warranties are always based on what's it called, like reasonable expected use, something like that. And essentially, like you're using it as intended. But that would be true regardless of whether you lease or you purchase the car. Actually, the bumper to bumper is the same warranty. It's Toyota's 3-year, 36,000-mile bumper to bumper, regardless of whether you lease or you purchase.
What's wrong with that car?
You should come here next time. So what's your way better than that?
I never listened after that.
Grace, you have a question?
How they got answered, I think the questions I had got answered. It was, the biggest one I had was, what if you drive 20 to 25,000 miles a year? And then answered the question.
Yeah, I would not advise leasing.
No, I saw the other candidates that somebody said,
Okay.
not vehicle, and, I tend to use less than that.
Okay.
So in miles like children, I feel like I'm not going to
Right. I know that Ford actually can go as low as 10,500 miles per year. So that might be a thing to consider as well.
Because that would make the retail value of it higher.
Right, so
Whereas
the
your
monthly
lease
would be
payment
lower.
would be less.
Right,
That's
exactly.
You're gonna
It's
Exactly.
going to
drive less
depreciate
miles.
less, so that means it's going to cost you less. So you're turning it in.
My payments are fine, but at the same time, I'm thinking, well, maybe my payments really should be lower because I'm not going to use all that.
But the thing that happens with something like that, for example, say you bought the 45 and you used 40, but you still were higher than the 36, you were better off to stay with the 45. Because it would actually cost you more if you just go a few thousand over the 36 than it would have been for you to have bought the 45,000. And also in doing the 45,000, should you want to buy it, then fortunately, there'll be a better buyer to buy out for you as well, if you should decide you want to buy it.
So you lease drive a certain amount of miles that you think you're going to drive in a 3-year period.
Correct, yes.
What happens if you do that and life is good and then all of a sudden your college kids decide to go to school 4 hours away and you end up putting a lot of miles and
Right.
you didn't really expect. How does all of that?
Well, then you end up paying some penalties when you go to turn in the car, which you can avoid if you buy the car, actually. We actually had one employee who was leasing a
That's
car,
what my friend said. He said then you just
and he
buy
put
it.
like 60,000 miles on a 45,000 mile lease, but then he just bought out the lease rather than paying the penalties. So that is an option that you have.
We have someone coming in tomorrow, we have a gal that's worried about that being older. She's about maybe 5 months out. We're going to look right now to see whether or not, based on the value, and sometimes that can happen, perhaps those 5 or 6 months would cost her $3,000, or if we took it in trade, it might be $1,500, and we may be able to lessen it. So, but we look at that on a one-on-one basis. And like Chris said, you can buy it out, you don't pay a penalty, you can buy it to own.
Right.
Do you always buy right at the end of the lease, or can you buy prior to?
You can,
Well,
you
a couple
can.
years in, you
Sometimes the
decide-
math works better at the maturity, but some people opt out to buy sooner.
Well, I could see another, I paid $500 for my 36,000-mile check. So
Right.
the cost savings on,
Oh, exactly.
you have to add that
We're
in
just
also.
trying that in.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
most definitely. It really, again, it's an option, and it's just an option that you should be made aware of. And it works for many people, it doesn't work for all. Some people like to own their cars. The average consumer,
Oh, it's 10.6 years is the average age of the average car in early America today, which is the highest it's ever been, actually.
last weekend, we took in half a dozen trades. The highest mileage trade was 230.
230.
235.
Right. Yeah.
And my lowest miles of trade of all those cars was 126. So 126, 235,000 miles. But that's what we're taking in, and people have just held on much longer, than ever before. So that we know the cars can do it too.
Right.
That's the
part
beauty
of
of
it.
it.
Sure.
Really. So there's just so many opportunities. It's a matter of being educated about it and then being informed. Then you can make a decision on what works best for you. And nobody says you have to do it. You make that decision yourself.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Irwin.
All right. Good.